So tell me about Murcia and paint a picture for me of what it was like growing up there.
So it's not a very big, I think when people think of Spain, right away it's Madrid, Barcelona. So it's a small place. It's by the Mediterranean, so it's very sunny. It's actually funny because I think the weather is quite similar to LA. Winters almost don't exist. The sea is really nearby. And yeah, I was very lucky to be born there and very close to my family. I kind of was born in a very sort of strange context. My mom is Argentinian. The whole side of my mom is Argentinian, and they relocated in Southeast Spain. And I was born with my parents were very young, and all my aunts and uncles were also quite young because both my mom and my dad are the eldest of the brothers and sisters. So I kind of grew up with all my aunts and uncles. My dad has 5 brothers and sisters, and so does my mom. And it was kind of quite intense. It's funny because a lot of friends that come by and they meet my family, they're like, Paula, like this is like a Almodovar movie. Like this is just so crazy. It is very noisy, lots of people coming in, ding dong, pregnant woman, ding dong, like kids. Like, people are like, who are these people? I'm like, it's my aunts and uncles. So I've always been used to like a community around me, and I've also always been used to being the youngest. And yeah, I had a very lively, very kind of intense childhood. And my mom, having, moved and traveled a lot when she was a child, she was like, this is great. It's a great place to be, but I think you need to see something else. You should just move out and discover what you want to do and experience other things. And that's kind of what brought me to Ireland. I lived in Ireland for like 2 years when I was 16. And then Germany, I was in Berlin for a while, and then London. So I haven't really come back to my hometown since I'm 15 years old, but I'm still very, very close to all my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents. I grew up in their house, really. So yeah, that's kind of my childhood. It was just a lot.
That's incredible. When did art first find its way into your family's life? I mean, as far as within your lineage.
So it's a mix of things. I think there have been many different influences, and I think that it's also reflected in my work that I feed off so many different mediums and reference. Like my father plays music incredibly. He's an amazing musician. He loves jazz, and he's just self-taught. And music was something that was always very present when I was around him. My mom, being South American, also brought that kind of, just like that different kind of push. We were always listening to Celia Cruz, a lot of Cuban music. And it's funny because to me, that's the kind of thing when you grow up, you take it for granted. That's, what it is. But even nowadays, like it's those references and those ideas come back to me, and it's just part of what I was around in a very natural way. And then my family, a lot of people in my family have also just been a lot into like painting and writing, and they haven't pursued it as a career, but it's always been there, especially also the craftsmanship of cloth making. Like my grandmother has always been so into making clothes. And I remember she would gather with her best friends once per week, and each of us, they had like a week allocated, and we would get a look done. So, I think we were about 4 girls, including my mom. So like, okay, it's Paula's turn. So what do you want? And my mom would be like, I want a tailor jacket this week. And so I was always around that. And my aunt studied fashion design, actually. And I spent a lot of time with her in Madrid as well. My mom would just like send me on a train to see her. So yeah, it's funny because even now, like I'll go through my mom's kind of wardrobes and I'll be like, what's this like crazy tie-dye, t-shirt? And it's like, oh, your great grandmother was doing that. Like, I remember we were doing that with Matt in like Buenos Aires, and just like things like that. It's quite funny. I think it was always something that my family from both sides, both my fathers and my mom, were always very open to and curious. I think that's like the main thing. I've always been surrounded by people that were very curious and very eager to like learn new things and discover and be very like hands-on.
Is that a trait of Spanish culture, or is it just that your family loved to experience kind of artistic, like kind of side gigs or something?
I'm not sure if it's a trait of Spanish culture. I mean, maybe it is. I mean, I've been very lucky that my parents, especially my mother, really supported me and was always very like, I think if that's what you want to do, you must go for it. And that also naturally I've had all those reference and those people around me that had access to techniques that I could learn from and knowledge I could take from. I don't know if it's, maybe it is. I think in general, people in at least where I come from are very curious and are very open to, they're quite playful. Maybe more than open, people are like playful. And that's also something I learned quite early on. Like I was always allowed to like make mistakes and discover things and be curious. And I think that's also so important when you're a child. In order to find your call is to be able to just try things out. And my mom always encouraged that. And my grandparents did as well, for me to like, I've done so many things. I've tried so much stuff. Like it's just almost silly. But yeah, I was very lucky in that sense.
Were your parents intentional with kind of teaching you about, making clothing or music, or was it just that you were around it so much that it was imbued into your daily life, and that's kind of how, art found its way into your life?
Honestly, I think like even my aunts always say like this was a great mistake. Like my parents weren't planning on me coming and everyone chipped in. All my aunts, my grandparents helped, and I think everyone was busy. So I just had to I was so used to hang with so many different people, and I had to adapt to whatever they were doing. So if it was the afternoon with my grandmother and her friends making stitching dresses, or just sitting down on the side of a studio whilst my father was playing the guitar and being silent, or just going to my aunt who would be going to a painting class, that would be it. I had no choice. So I think it was just luck, and the fact that everyone was so generous with me, and I was just so used to hanging out with so many different people that they were all doing different things, that I kind of got used to adapt to that. And I sucked in so much from all those different characters.
Yeah, you were exposed to all these different aspects because you had to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then your mom made wedding dresses for people. Did she have a custom wedding dress atelier, or did she... How was her studio set up, and what was it like growing up in that environment?
So my mom still does that, and actually it was her sister who studied fashion design, and she moved to Madrid, opened a wedding dress atelier, where I've been a lot and I've spent a lot of time. And my mom actually in the morning, my mom studied law and she works for the state. In the morning, she had a full-time job working at, it's something called fonctionnaire, I don't know, state worker, I guess it's a translation. And she had the free afternoons. And my aunt, because it was doing very well, her business in Madrid, decided to open something in Southeast Spain. But obviously Madrid, Murcia, it's a 5-hour drive. And she told my mom, hey, why don't you help me out? My mom had never studied fashion. She didn't know how to stitch. She didn't know how to do anything. But she's very good with people, and she learns very quickly. And after 3 years, I think, my aunt was a little bit overboard with everything. She found the relationship with the clients very complicated, and my mom asked her to buy the business. So that's how she kind of started doing her own thing. So also something quite peculiar about my mother is that in the morning she is a lawyer, she works for the state, and in the afternoon she makes wedding dresses. So yeah, someone very disciplined, with incredible work ethics. It has also been very inspirational for me because, yeah, she's just like so hardworking, self-taught. I remember coming back from school and it would be like a mess. Like there wouldn't be space for me in the table because they would be cutting the wedding dresses and I have to like sit in a corner. And I remember as soon as I'd say, oh, I'm a little bored, my mom would be like, okay, sit here. And I'll be making like buttons for the wedding dresses because sometimes they have like 200 or 300 buttons. So I just sit down in a corner and so I've learned very quickly to never say that I was bored because there would always be something for me to do. And yeah, it's always been very funny to also look at the fittings from the inside of the store and kind of listen to the conversations and what's going on. I feel like my mom could almost make a movie and write a book about it because it's really the wedding dress scene. It's quite a wild one. So I always say I'd never do wedding dresses.
I feel like you just saying that means that at some point you're going to do a wedding dress.
Oh, I don't know. I hope not. Drew, literally, that would hunt me down. Like, I'm always like, no, never. I've just seen too many things.
It reminds me a little bit of Yohji Yamamoto's story about how he, didn't want to do fashion, but he was around his mom's, dress studio all day and kind of fell into fashion. So that's really fascinating. Do you remember when you discovered fashion with a capital F? Do you remember what age you were or what you saw for the first time?
I remember very clearly the first time an item of clothing made me feel special. My aunt, Marilla, who studied fashion design, she had gone to London on a trip and she brought back a pair of Dr. Martens for me, purple Dr. Martens. And I remember, I must have been like 5 or 6, so vividly, like wearing them and thinking, what, like this is just so cool. I had never seen anything like that. And it just made me feel so well, so good about myself. So I think that's really like the first time. But to be honest with you, I as I said, it has been so like interlinked to my upbringing. Like since I was a child, I just remember, fabric being cut, things being stitched around me, embroideries, tie-dyeing. My grandmother would be like, there's a tablecloth to do, like we'll make it ourselves, we would never buy it. So yeah, but I think fashion capital F, I mean, I don't know if that can be fashion capital F, but yeah, that moment, it's something I remember quite well.
I think it is. That first piece is so important, because you just treat it like, like it's gold or something. So when did you decide that you were going to pursue fashion and go to art school?
So as you very well kind of said earlier, I never wanted to do fashion. I was just like, I never thought that could be something that would interest me. I loved reading. I was good at school. I'll be honest with you, I thought like fashion wasn't that interesting. And I looked down at it and I thought it was kind of silly and not very intellectually charged. And that just put me off. And when I went to Ireland, I was doing what's called the Leaving Cert, which is like the last years of school. I was doing full science and I wanted to do either medicine or architecture. And actually just, as I was about to decide what to do, I was just very torn because I was telling my mother and like, I think maybe somehow I'd like to do something related to art, but I don't know what. And my mom knew about St. Martin's and she had been there. And she's, she knows me very well. She would have never said you should do fashion because I would have been like, what? Like, this makes no sense. But she told me, I'm going to London. Do you want to come with me? And there is a place I think you need to see. And we went to St. Martin's, and I remember when I saw the library and I saw how I just had like a look, spent half a day there because it was an open day. I was like, okay, actually, fashion can be something that is very based on research, which is something I love doing. And it's just so technical, which I love as well. And it would allow me to do, it's just so broad. And it kind of fascinated me. I was like, I want to be here. This is like, I would have never thought of such a place. And that's when I decided to do fashion. That's when I was like, okay, I think it makes sense. It's very research based, which I love doing. It's very technical. I love pattern cutting, and it just kind of made sense when we had that trip to London. So that's kind of, yeah, again, my mom.
When you made that trip, were you at the age when you were about ready to go to CSM, or was this like a couple years earlier, so you still had some time to think about it?
I was 18, so I would have had to start studying, and I had no portfolio because I hadn't done arts in the 2 final years of school. So I had to put a portfolio together. I had no clue what a portfolio meant. I had never gone to like drawing classes or painting, which is at St. Martin's. Normally the portfolios to get in are very like drawing heavy. And I was like, okay, so how are we going to do this? And I took a year off to prepare and get to understand a little bit better how to make that happen.
Were you doing classes at a local school in the meantime, or were you working during that year off?
Yeah. So at the time, my mother was, her partner was in Berlin, and she spent half the time there. Berlin was still a very affordable place to live in. So my mom was like, why don't you go to Berlin? Drawing classes are going to be much cheaper there. And yeah, it's like, it's a beautiful capital, and it'll help you. And that's what I did. I moved to Berlin. I was kind of doing some things on the side, working, and I was going to drawing classes. And that's when I applied to what's called Fashion Folio, which is a course that helps you. It's like a foundation course, which is in the UK. I think it's almost compulsory if you want to do any art-related career.
What was your experience at CSM? What was that like? I can imagine when you visited the first time how inspiring it was, because the campus is beautiful. You're in this, beautiful town, like on the outskirts of London. I'm sure it was magical. Once you got there, was it intimidating? Was it what were all the feelings you had when you first arrived?
So I actually first try, I didn't get in. And I remember my mom came with me and she told me, you're not going to get in. And I was like that's also one thing about my mother. She's brutally honest. And she was like, you're just not ready. Like, I've seen all the people's portfolio and like the level, and you're just not there. So I decided to spend some time in South Spain. I was helping my mother, and I went on Fashion Folio. I didn't want to pay for the entire year, which is 3 trimesters. So I went straight to the last one, and it was really hardcore because I had like a third of the time anyone else did, but I just really, really wanted it. And that's when I got in. And I mean, I think a lot of people message me and ask, like, I want to start there. What do you think? Like, would you recommend? And I think it's just a very personal experience. And it also really depends. I think Brexit has really affected the school now, but in general, I think London, since Brexit, is not the same. But I had an amazing time. I loved it. It was very competitive. It was, I think, very often you just had to find your own way to do things, but I kind of love that. I thrive in those sort of environments where you're kind of left to do your thing, and just everyone around me was so talented. I think that's been the best thing about St. Martin's. It wasn't necessarily about the school itself, but like the people around me, like that are still friends. It's just people that are just so good, so eager, so hungry, so open to learn, to discover. friends that come from all over the world, different cultures. That was just so amusing. And that's why I spent a lot of time there, because I did the foundation and then I did the BA and then the master's. And they were like, you need to leave. I would have, yeah,
They kicked you out.
Yeah, they were like, you have to leave now. But yeah, I really, really liked it.
Do you remember when everything clicked for you as far as, you know, because your design language is unique. And was there a particular moment when you were at school that you figured out what it is that you're going to make?
Yeah, I think that was during the master's. And that's why I really wanted to do the master's. I had done, when you do the BA, you have the option to go and do an internship year abroad and work for other brands, which I was super eager to do. I was always like, throughout my BA, I was always working on the side, assisting, doing pattern cutting, finding like anything, any hustle to like, you know, get money and learn something. So when I went on the year out, actually I worked for for a brand based in London, a small brand, where I started assisting the pattern cutter, and then I was just assisting Ashish on research. I was coming to Paris to do the sales with him. So I was it was really interesting because I was part of the entire process. And then I also did an internship at Gucci in Rome, which was very interesting because it was, again, going from like a very small company to like a big giant. And I made loads of friends. People were really nice to me and I really liked it. And I also spent some time at Margiela, 6 months. So I think that was a really key year for me to kind of get a foot on what, you know, the industry really means. Because I think that's one thing is when you go to uni, you study. Another very different one is when you just have to work for someone else. It's just very, very different. And I think having a taste on working for like big house, medium, and like small one, it was just very good to me to kind of get my head around what I wanted to do. And then I got into the master's and I was like, okay, this is like, I've got a year and a half to set the design language that would be my brand. And I made the most out of that year. I was just I wanted it so bad. And I felt so privileged to be able to do that. I did it thanks to a scholarship from Stella McCartney. And that's kind of how I spent that year and a half doing a lot of research. And it's things that I still feed off.
What was your experience at Gucci? Were you there with Alessandro Michele, or was this before he was there?
So it was very interesting because I was there when the change happened from Frida to Alessandro. And it was actually one of the first times that they had an intern, just because it wasn't common. I don't know why, but everyone was so nice to me. And it was very interesting because I was working with a woman called Ilona, who's really fun. And we were designing the t-shirts for the menswear department. Like it was just something so specific. But I'm just so curious. I was always asking everyone what they were doing, if I could help. I remember this fascinated me. They had a library and you could order any book you wanted if you needed it for research. And I was like, wait, what? So they would always be like, okay, where's Paula? Well, she's downstairs in the library. And they were like, okay, you can't just every day ask for a book, but you need to be a little bit more cautious.
So this is how you filled up your library at home? No.
I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. You had to leave the book there. But I always found it fascinating. And everyone was just so nice to me. I worked with Davide Rene, who is now creative director of Moschino. I made great friends and mentors. My friend Michael, who eventually was working for the art direction department, someone I too very often. And it was really nice because it really felt again like what growing up in my hometown had been like. I've always been used to be like the youngest and being able to like learn from people that had been around much longer than me, and everyone was just really welcoming and very nice. So I have very good memories from Gucci.
Did you have any experience with Alessandro himself? Were you able to work with him or talk to him at all?
Yeah, Well, the thing is that I started with Frida and finished with Alessandro. And I think it was maybe like a month and a half
Got it.
overlap. But yeah, I didn't work on I was just an intern and I didn't work a lot with him, but I was present in fittings. And it was that key point for them where they had to change the entire vision. So I think everyone was just like doing research.
Stressful. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It was very stressful, but also very, very interesting to see and to be around.
It's interesting how you describe the team at Gucci as being more communal, similar to upbringing. And I think that's a beautiful part of Italian culture, but also Spanish culture, is this kind of family aspect and, bringing in the team as if they were part of the family. And so I'm sure that made it a familiar feeling for you and kind of helped your first experience.
For sure. Honestly, it was just like people. I remember the head designer would make dinners at his place, and I was invited. And we had to make tomato sauce, and I'll be in charge of chopping the garlic. And it just made it much easier and nicer. And I think, that's what I learned from Gucci. It's like the work environment is so important. Taking care of your team is so important, and creating a space where people feel good is just gonna benefit the design. It's gonna benefit you, the brand, and spending time on that is key, I think.
Did you go directly from Gucci to Margiela? What was that like? Because that's two different sized brands. I mean, two brands that are well loved by our community. How did that experience change once you went to Margiela?
So Margiela was the one place I really wanted to be at. Like, I was just so obsessed to be there. It was so important to me. That was the one place I really wanted to intern, and I was just very driven to get there. And my best friend was doing an internship there, Ernesto, and he put me in touch with the head designer. And I got offered a place there. So I moved to Paris. And I think it was very interesting on the creative side because we got to work a lot with John. And I worked both on the ready-to-wear and the artisanal collections. And it was just, creatively speaking, so free and just so interesting. They rely, at least at the time, I don't know now, a lot on interns. And we had a voice, and a lot of the ideas were coming from us. We had a lot of space to experiment, to really just play. But at the same time, I had a very awful boss who wasn't really nice, as opposed to the experience I had just had at Gucci. And that just made it very difficult and made it very not nice. So that's also another thing I learned, that, you can think of the most incredible place and the most incredible house and dream to be there. But if the environment around it is not right, it can really make that experience, awful.
Absolutely. What did you learn being around John and kind of watching him work?
His curiosity. I think he's so open, and he's a really good listener. And that's great when you are creative, to actually understand that you don't know it all, and you might have people around you that, have a tenth of your experience, but that might have that little something or that little idea, and that he really pushed us to experiment and to try things out. We were really encouraged to experiment. And I think that's very smart of him, because a lot of the things that actually made it to the catwalk, it was just us playing around in the basement.
Yeah, John is really playful. And from what I know about him, it seems like he genuinely enjoys the young people that are around him. And I think that's part of the reason why he's able to be successful in, our day and age, because he absolutely has the skill. I mean, he's a true dressmaker. But he loves the young people that are around him.
Yeah.
And he is very curious, like you said. So I'm sure that was an incredible experience working with him.
I mean, it was really amazing.
He's one of my favorite designers.
Really, really amazing.
You then got to work a little bit with Kanye at Yeezy. How did that experience come about?
So I knew I really wanted to do my own thing. I didn't know this, like, how to get there. But when I got accepted into the master's and I managed to get a sponsorship to pay for it, I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to work towards. And then the show happened and I was like, okay, now what? And
your MA show?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. MA show. And then Fabio Bidas, who's the director of the Masters, said to me, he's always said to me, you need to move to Paris. Your place is in Paris. Like, your language, your world will be much more understood there than in London. He's always pushed me to do that. And I'm very stubborn. And I was like, yeah, but London, I want to stay in London. Da, da, da. It's only been a year less than a year that we've moved to Paris. But anyway, he put us in touch, Ernesto, my best friend who I had worked with at Margiela, and he said, there's this woman in Paris, she's amazing, you need to meet her. Her name is Vittoria Matarrese, and she is the head of special projects at Palais de Tokyo. We managed to get to Paris. I think we went by bus or something like that. And we rocked in and we're like, hey, so, this is us. And she was like, okay, like, you guys are cute. Like, what do you want? And we were like, we want to do something here at Palais de Tokyo. Like, can you help us? And she said, okay, show me your portfolio. Had a look at it. She's like, I like your work. Yeah, I'll give you space. And we were like, wait, what? She's like, yeah, I'll give you space during couture. Like, you can do something at Palais de Tokyo. So we went back home and we were like, okay, this is crazy. We have like a space at Palais de Tokyo. We need to put a collection together. We had no money, and literally 2 months. And we thought about it for like 5 minutes and we said, we don't know how we're going to do this. But, one thing I've learned in my life is between doing and not doing, always do. That's me personally, because you always learn something about it. You figure it out. So we managed to put together a show. It was a mess. It was hectic. We got loads of friends to help, family, people came from all over. And November magazine did an article about it. I was depleted. I thought it was the most silly thing we had done. Why did we put a show together when actually, we didn't really have a plan for a brand. We had no plan to, to start stocking anywhere. I was like, what are we doing? But that actually, I received a call from Kanye because he saw those pictures and he liked the work, and that led me to a freelance job with him. So that was through that project that kind of came out of nowhere and that I thought had been a little bit reckless of me to do. I received a call and he was like, I've seen your work. I think it's great. When you come to LA, I'd love to meet you and to discover your point of view. So that's how I started working for him.
So after your first show, of course, you wanted to sell that collection. Were you working on the sales while also being in Los Angeles, working with him?
No. So also what happened, this is all been very organic, very, I had no contacts. I knew no one. But I think a little bit before, I think we did that show in July and then Kanye called me in August. But whilst we were doing the show, I received a call. I received an email from Dover Street Market Ginza, and they were like, hey, we've seen these pictures. Like, can we come to your showroom? And I was like, my showroom? Like, I don't have a showroom. I didn't even know what a line sheet was. And we convinced our friend to lend us his living room, and we improvised. You can't even call that a showroom. It was a really reckless showcase of things, and that's how I got my first order, and that I produced with my mother in South Spain. And at the same time, Kanye called and he was like, why don't you come work for me? And I knew I wanted to do my brand and I couldn't be there full time. So we agreed that I will come on and do kind of special projects and, be between LA and London.
So DSM Ginza was the first store that bought your brand. That's amazing. Dover Street Market Ginza, the team there is incredible, and they're so great at supporting young designers. What do you think you learned from working with Kanye on those special projects? Are there any takeaways you have from that experience?
Oh, I learned so much. It was so tough, but I learned so much. And I feel so privileged to have had that time there. Because really, looking back, I'll be honest with you, Drew, I had no clue what I was getting into. Like, I obviously knew who he was, but I didn't know the extent of what that call meant and the projects I got involved into. Like, I had no idea. Like, I didn't even know who he was married to. Like, I rocked in. I got flew to LA first time in LA. I obviously, in my European mind, I decided to walk to the studio. 5 minutes later, I'm in the highway with these cowboy boots. So I just kind of got thrown to this world without even, I just had no clue what I was getting into. I learned so much from him, and he was so generous and so genuine. And again, he's just someone that is so curious and so, just so open-minded. And one thing that was amazing about working with him is that very, very often is the case that I show my work to people, and especially at the time, and they were like very confused, like, we don't really understand. What do you do? Like, is it 3D that you do? Or is it like set design? Or is it like, are you more into textiles? And I just talked to him, he saw the work, and he got it right away. And all the projects we worked on were just like, they just made sense. So I did so many things. I worked on video clips. I remember when I worked on costumes for the Spike Jones clip with, what's the one? You're such a fucking hoe.
I love it.
Yeah, that one.
You worked on the big kind of square
what
outfits.
She's wearing. No, what she's wearing. And then loads of research. That's when we also did Pornhub awards. I'd be also another thing. Like, people were like, what the fuck? Like, he just called me on the spot. He was like, I was in LA. He's like, you need to come to this place. We're doing this thing, and we need to talk about, like, the awards that are going to be given, the sculptures of it. I didn't know what I was getting into. So I just rocked into Pornhubs. I remember I was like wearing this really random thing, and people were like, it's Pornhub awards, you need to glam up, this is not looking good. And we did all these dresses and worked with Vanessa Beecroft on the operas for the Lincoln Center, those costumes as well, Sunday service, and even some projects that never saw the light. But I think what's so amazing about Kanye, and I've always admired so much, is that he's just process is so important. It's even more important than the result, The point is not to get this perfect, whatever clip or silhouette or piece of clothing. It's really about discovering and pushing and really trying to make something great, the best you can do. And that's just so rare to find. It's so rare. People are just so driven by numbers, by reviews, by hitting targets, that it was literally like a playground. I mean, it was very high speed and intensity. It was a lot, but I was just thinking to myself, like, this man doesn't need to be doing this, like, he's good to just go and chill. And he's just so hardworking, and we would be doing fittings until like 4 a.m. He would take a car and do like a Sunday service, like 2 hours straight. And I was like, whoa, that's just so the passion was just so contagious.
When you look back at your experiences at Gucci, Margiela, and Kanye, all of those ateliers I'm sure were so different from each other. Is there anything you took from those experiences and put them into kind of how you built your studio?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I think at Gucci, for sure, I've learned how important it is to just really take care of your team. Like you are no one. I already knew that from my mother, and I already knew that from the way I've been brought up. Like your team is, ideas are nothing if they have no legs, you know? Like you really need the force to actually make things happen. So team, I think I learned that at Gucci, like how important it is to take care of the people that help you and that are part of your ideas and your vision. I think at Margiela, I learned that the hard way as well, because I saw how incredible ideas and research are just not enough. You also need to be good to the people around you, but also how you need to let go sometimes and allow your team to bring their input and to experiment. I think that's something I really try to delegate a lot. Also, honestly, because I really trust the people I work with. And if we've decided to work with together, it's because I think they're the best. And I've got as much to learn from them as hopefully they have to learn from me. So that was Margiela. I think just John is so curious and he's so open to let you bring your point of view. And Kanye, the drive, like it was just so wild. Yeah. I think that really trying to we did things that were just we did things that I was like, this is never going to happen, you know? And it did, just because I think that's also what he's great at. He's really good at getting the people and kind of feeding them that energy and making it happen.
That belief is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so important. And it's very, I don't know about you. I also wanted to talk to you and know what you thought, but I think it's very easy when you are in the grind and you're so having a company, having a brand. I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like design is almost only 15% of my everyday. It can be so daunting and it's very easy to lose hope sometimes and believe. So yeah, I just also wanted to know what your thoughts.
I mean, I think we're in a similar stage. You're generous in saying maybe design is 15%. I think it's maybe 5%.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the, this could be a whole conversation about the speed of our industry. And I think for me, that's what it comes down to. I am somebody that loves to spend a lot of time in the process of an idea. I've always kind of felt like, for me at least, the world doesn't need more brands, so the fact that I'm making clothing, I want it to be more about the story as opposed to just making product, and so to kind of pursue that idea, I like to really dive in deep to what I'm thinking about, what's kind of moving my spirit at the moment. But, when we have to show something every 6 months, and some designers are showing, more than that a year, you have to, we have to present something whether we're ready or not. And that's just kind of the reality of it. I think those time constraints do help me. I can tend to fall into a more of a perfectionist, way of being, as opposed to a, someone who's just okay kind of releasing something if it's half finished, which is one of the reasons why Kanye has been an inspiration for me over the course of my creative life, because he's not afraid to put a deadline on something, and even if it doesn't make it, or even if it's half finished, he still is creating a lot of excitement about what he's doing. But yeah, I think the design aspect is kind of 5% of it, because you're overseeing production, you're overseeing development, and in the meantime, while you're dealing with numbers and sales and all those things, then you're trying to, find inspiration. But I think it's important to have at least a moment of your day to do creative work. And I'd be curious to know, for you, how do you set aside your time, to recharge and to kind of focus on the creativity?
I've learned this. It's taken me some time to learn that, but I have a lot of friends that work in fashion, friends that work in the tech industry, friends that work in science. And I understood quite early on that this was like a marathon for me, and it was going to be a lot of collections and a lot of years and a lot of months. I am the kind of person, like, I have no limit. Like, I could work until like weekends. I could work until like 6 a.m. That's not, it's my passion, it's funny. I was reading an article by Rosalia, and she was saying, I would do this for free. And I completely relate to that. Like, I find it so difficult to put a price to my work just because I like it so much that it seems almost wrong. So I would just do it forever. But obviously, I think it can get counterproductive. You need to sleep, you need to be healthy, you need to. So I've learned to be very disciplined about my time and about recharging and about setting time aside to exercise, to read, to do whatever fuels my mind. So I'm just very, very disciplined as a person. So I exercise very often, very frequently. There is no phone in bed. It's just only reading. And I don't do weekends. I do 10 to 6. And the time we have at the studio is sacred. And we've got a lot to get done, and everyone's going to do it. So I just learned to be very disciplined. And I think at one point, in my mind, discipline was equal, something very rigid, and that I couldn't be creative enough if there was a mess. And actually, it's the opposite. I think in order to have the space, both mentally and physically, you need to create an environment where things are done, where there is proper retro planning in place. It's words that sound so boring, I know, and that's what they sounded to me. But now I understand why, if you really want to do this for the long run, you need a structure and you need a discipline. And that's just, I've learned whilst this turned from a hobby and a passion into a business. And I just realized that I'm not alone. I have a team, and I have duties, and that requires a certain schedule, and it's really helped me creatively as well.
Is there a way that you structure your mornings before you go into the studio to kind of help you get into that mindset of the day?
Yeah, I wake up. I'm not the kind of person that like wakes up, put the shoes on, and leaves. I wake up. I give myself time to like have a tea and cycle to the studio. Very often I try to go to the gym before, exercise before. And yeah, when I'm at the studio, it's just really kind of like tunnel. We have meetings in place, and very often we know what's going to happen, 8 months ahead. Like, we are quite, we try to be quite structured, just because we're very small, and we are forced to be very lean in the way we operate, the costs and everything. And that just requires, as I said, some discipline, structure, and so much goes wrong, even though we try to be as
always
prepared. Yeah, so much goes wrong that I think to myself, oh my God, like how, because I know some people like, finish collections like a day before the show. And I'm like, how? Like, it's just that you can't.
I couldn't, at least.
Yeah. How are you? How do you do it? Is it, you feel like...
How do I prepare a collection?
Yeah.
Or sometimes there are parts that you are finishing last minute. Sometimes there's an idea that you can't let go of, and it might
For
be
sure.
like a week before, but
100%,
I have,
yeah.
I have a little bit different upbringing than you do, in that I didn't go to art school. So, I can't make a pattern. I can't, I can't draw, I can't do fashion illustration. So, of course I've been doing this for long enough that I've learned how to work, with others to get the vision done. But I think because of that, I can't rely on doing something last minute and doing something myself, So when I'm thinking about collection structure, generally I'm very visual in the way I think about things, even a structure. So I usually come up with ideas and I almost lay them out, on like I don't make a mood board in a traditional way, like, maybe they taught you at school or how some other designers would do it. The mood board's kind of in my head, but it's more when I'm thinking about the structure of the collection, and, so I'll design the coats, the jackets, shirts and pants, all kind of based on an idea. And I will print them out and I'll just put them up, and I just kind of look at it for a while and I try to find the gaps and the holes. But because I can't sew, and I have friends that do make patterns and sew their own pieces, I can't be doing it the night before. I have to rely on other people.
Yeah.
And, at this stage, those other people have, other clients or other work that they're working on. And so, I think that's because I have that restriction. It's helped me prepare differently. And I don't like to be late, and, being last minute would stress me out more than the, yeah. I mean, having the stress to, trading that stress for having like that one piece in the collection or something, I just kind of feel like, just skip it. How do you self-edit? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, right? Is that self-editing process is really important.
It's very intuitive. We tend to do a lot of fittings. We're constantly trying things on. And we're like, how does this work? How they laugh at me because when we're doing a collection, I tend to think on pieces individually at the beginning. It depends really. It depends on the season. But this season, it's very like that. It's really good. It would be amazing. And I was like, how is all of that going to work together? So I do some very quick drawings, like they look very goofy. And I start looking, as you say, like I see holes and gaps, and I'm like, there is that missing, or that is too much and we need to remove. But it's really an ongoing process. It's not like we can't afford to do like a collection and then get 30% out. We just don't have the means to do that.
Right.
So we have to be very careful about, even from the beginning, where like this needs to work, because there's no other way. So it's just a lot of fittings and trying. And for me, it is very important that, I think from the outside, it looks like we do something that feels very creative. But ultimately, I think it's very important that the clothing, the garments, the products are very wearable and they feel good, they're comfortable. That's really key to me. So that's why I also spend a lot of time at the factories and working with the artisans and the craftsmen, just because it's genuinely very interested in their knowledge and their process, and it also influences the way we do things, because I'm like, I know they can work that technique out. What if we change that thread for mohair, and what if we actually did those shoes in this other material? So it's a test trial kind of journey.
Now that you have a team, what parts of your process are you not letting go of? Are you still making your patterns? Are you still overseeing the production? What have you been able to kind of outsource? But I'm sure that there are some things that you absolutely want to hold on to, other than the design.
It really depends. I mean, we are currently 4 full-time people, so it's not like a huge team. And that allows me to have a really good overview of what's going on. I mean, there are things like the specifics, especially production, that there are too many details. And once the product has been made and we've done the modifications for that go into production, it's just a matter of really liaising with the suppliers and making sure we get the materials on time. All of that, I'm not part of that. But in terms of patterns, like we were doing some custom made look today, and I was working on the pattern just because I really like pattern making. But I haven't done patterns in a long time, just because there's so many other things that need my attention. I love going to the factories. When we do the products, the way we work, we do the first 12s at the studio. We do the first prototypes. And once we are like, okay, we like this, then we go for about 2 weeks to my hometown. And we spend those 2 weeks making the products at the factory. It's very intense. It's very time consuming, but I really like it because it's very immediate. It allows me to be like, that I know that doesn't look good. Could we unpick it and redo it? So that's one thing I'll never let go of. I think I'm not the kind of designer that would do a tech pack, send it to the factory, come back to. I just think it's much better to like be there, see the machines, understand what the possibilities are, work with the artisans, learn from their process. And we do a lot of changes actually when we are there. And a lot of ideas come and we're like, actually, that would be an amazing showpiece for like, what if we did that with that volume? And yeah, that's one of the parts that I actually somehow struggle most with, because it's very physical, but at the end of the day, I love most, because it's just when it's kind of like Santa coming, when you start seeing all the different parts coming together, it just makes it worth it.
Are you making everything right now in your hometown, or where are you manufacturing?
No. So the knitwear is done in Belgium. And I try to go once per season to do some research and go to the factory and kind of work with them. And then the shoes are made very close to my hometown. The bags are made in South Spain, and the woven is done between Italy and South Spain as well. So it's a little bit...
But it's still pretty close to you. Yeah, which is nice.
Very close. Yeah, that's very nice.
Do you feel that when you're going from Paris back to your hometown, does changing your environment kind of change how you look at your work?
I don't think it changes how I look at my work, but I think going to my hometown kind of removes a lot of the pressure. Speaking to my family and my friends, who like a lot of them just are not in this industry, it makes me realize that a lot of what I think are like very big problems don't matter to 99.999% of the world. And that is quite reassuring. It's just it can be very heavy and it can be very daunting, just because, as I said, this has moved from my passion and my passion project into a business. And that comes with a big responsibility, deadlines and production fuck-ups and people that don't pay you on time and all that awful words, cash flow and this and that, something I didn't study for. And it just can't get, so you're like, how did I get here? Like, I just really like experimenting and making, doing fittings and clothes and research. That how did I get here? So yeah, just going to my hometown kind of, it removes the pressure. And it's just like, you know what? I think ultimately, what makes it worth it is seeing people wearing the clothes and getting messages from people that are like, I just bought this and I saved up to buy this bag and I'm just so happy and it makes me feel so good when I wear it. And yeah, I just keep reminding myself that.
Yeah, that is a beautiful experience. Because I think we do this because we have a story to share, but we also do it for others because we want to share that story. When you go home to work in the factories for those 2 weeks, are there places that kind of put you in a maybe not put you in a certain mood, but do you feel that there's energy at certain places that you will just go visit in order to kind of feel a certain way? Is there a building you like to drive by? Is there a place you like to go eat?
Yeah, it's very food oriented. It's for the entire team. So that's another one of my passions. I love food and tea, and that's something really I'm very happy to share with my team. We love the food experience there. It's just so good. We're all so excited for like our tomato toast in the morning with like a fresh orange juice, and we have our spots like, okay, where are we going tonight for dinner? And we know the people know us, it's like, oh, Anna, Amelia, how are you? So, okay, you're doing like the brothos this season. Okay. Like it's very hands-on. It's very intense. It's a lot of driving and this and that. But yeah, I think being able, and it again goes back to like, growing up, this idea of like sitting down and sharing your day with your family. And that makes me, it's just very reassuring, to keep going to the same place, I don't drink coffee, but the coffee would be excellent. The toasts are going to be just delicious. And it's nice to be able to share that with them. So yeah, it's definitely very, the great experiences that we get from those trips are very food oriented.
Yeah. And you even include food in your collections before.
Yeah.
When looking at your work, I can tell that kind of multi-sensory experience is something that's really important to you. When did that become something that you focused on?
I think very early on, when we think of fashion and the way we consume fashion, it's images that come to mind, right? But really, like fashion, it's something that we wear, we sit in the tube with. It's something that we touch and that has texture and like even smells a certain way. When I think of like my grandparents' jumper, certain scent comes to mind. It is not only visual, and that's something that kind of bothered me, especially because through my work, I really try to create things that you really that call to be touched, to be felt in a way that is not just the eyes. And I just started reading a lot about that, kind of how we live in a world that's called ocular centric, and it's all about the eye and the way we consume fashion, the way we consume a lot of things. It's just through the eyes, whilst we are designed to feel in many different ways. And I just thought, okay, how can we consume in a way that is just not visual? And I was like, what if we ate a collection? So that's kind of when all those ideas started coming to place. And when we started working with Celica Dinga from Caro Diario, who's a friend that now creates all these beautiful installations in Paris. And we've also worked with Dambi Kim, who is an incredible tea master. And I just think because of the way we research and we create our garments, it's just so hands-on, and I can't let it just be an image. And I want to have that conversation with whoever buys the clothes that we offer not just a garment, but maybe a way to experience those pieces. And that's how we've also chosen to do presentations instead of fashion shows, because it allows for a more sensorial and more kind of wholesome experience in my experience.
I was going to ask you about that because you did a show for your MA collection, and then you did a show for Autumn Winter 19 during Paris Fashion Week. But then you left the show.
Yeah.
You left the show style behind. Why is it that you did that? What was the feeling you had when you did those first two shows?
There's so much like intricacy and so many details, and it just feels wrong that all of that goes into like a 4-minute catwalk. And I change my mind all the time. So, next season I might be like, 80s, we need to do a fashion show and it'll be great. But it's just that it's always kind of bothered me that we've been using the same format since the 50s. I'm like, there must be another way to showcase fashion and to invite people to like interact with what we've done and we've worked on for 6 months. And that's why the installations kind of so far have been the right format for us. And yeah, it's kind of, I understand that it's a busy week. Everyone, you need to go from one show to another. It's a very quick, snappy way to get the shows and all the looks going and get an overview of what a collection feels like. But I don't know. I just talking about creativity. I think there's just so much that we could be doing. It's so exciting. Like that's kind of what moves me. Yeah, no show for now.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Well, your presentations are beautiful. So I think the way you're doing it is incredible. You've lived a lot of places. I actually didn't know that you lived in Ireland and Berlin. When, architecture is something that you mentioned. I also wanted to be an architect before I knew about making clothing. How do you feel that and because your pieces are very sculptural and very architectural as well. So I'm curious how you look at your work through an architectural lens. And I'm fascinated or curious to hear if it has some lineage kind of from the places that you've lived.
Maybe it does. But if it does, it's definitely not conscious. When it comes to volume, and I kind of have to trick myself sometimes. Like I put myself limits. I'm like, okay, this season where like it'd be good if it was only flat and we're going to work only from like, flat table and see the pattern cut table and see what that turns into. Or sometimes it's just like very 3D and kind of like a moulage exercise. I don't know. It's not that I look at architecture and I get directly influenced by it, but I think it's that space between garment and self that intrigues me, and how that garment can make you feel, or how that garment can help you portray yourself. And that's kind of, I guess, linked to architecture. But I don't think it's I do it consciously.
I noticed that from your collections, you're adding more structure or volume to the shoulders or to the headwear. Mm-hmm. Is there a conscious reason that you focus on the shoulders and headwear accessories?
I love a hat. My mother, she collects hat blocks. And I learned how to make hats just ages ago. And my grandfather loved hats. He had a hat collection. And yeah, it's just something that is so easy it's an accessory that can change the entire mood of your look. And it's so easy to put on and off. And I just find it so playful. And I've just always naturally been very interested in hats, and we always make a hat, but in a very playful, natural way. We would be doing fittings, and I'm like, just literally take what's at top, make like a random and just put it on, and that's it, and it looks great. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't think about it more than that. And yeah, when it comes to the shoulder, I don't know, there's something. I think when I think about the idea of like feeling cozy and protected, I tend to like put my shoulders up, You're like, it's that idea of like feeling like warm and cozy. And yeah, there's something really nice about having your shoulders covering your neck. I'm always cold by nature. So I love to Yeah, to include those sort of pieces that are like a kind of scarf or like a big volume shoulder that kind of wrap you and make you feel.
Yeah, I can see that because there is a certain fluidity that you like to add within the hats and within the shoulder pieces.
Yeah, it's really funny talking to you because, you know, there are all these things that, I'll be honest with you, I try not to think too much about any of these things that we're talking about. And it is really nice to hear you and to talk to you, because it's things that I never analyze and that they obviously have a meaning.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we, one of the through lines I think I'm finding by having these conversations is that there are things from our childhood that we bring into our artistic life, and sometimes we don't think about it. And so it's really fascinating to hear that, that about your mom collecting the hat blocks. That's incredible.
What are things from your childhood that you bring back?
I grew up in a mostly blue collar family with no artists and no fashion designers in a very blue collar area. I don't know if you went to Long Beach when you were here in LA, but, Long Beach is a port city, and I grew up in a port city up outside of Seattle. So it's a lot of industry. It's a lot of, there's not a lot of, from the eye, it's not a lot of things that would grab you in any sort of way. It's kind of the place that you could drive by on the highway and totally look past. But so I think coming from, growing up in a like rainy industrial area has an impact, which is why I'm so curious about your environment and why I've asked you about that. Also, I think the biggest experience was growing up with a father that worked with in the nonprofit sector. My dad helped raise money for different nonprofits around the world, and because of that, I got to go to India and I got to go to these places that were really tough, as well as I would go to the hospital with my dad and visit people who were dying, and he was intentional, I think, about taking me on these experiences because I think he wanted to show me what the world was really like. And viewing humanity in that way, kind of seeing this like, how most of the world lives. I was so blessed growing up, but I really was able to see like a lot of hard things, And so at the same time, there was so much life in those experiences. When I went to India, and I've been back several times, and I even lived there when I was in my early 20s for a few months, it was one of the hardest places to be, but it was also one of the most beautiful places to be, in that the community was so encouraging and so loving. The people, I would go to like a friend of a friend's mom's house to say hi or something, and I would end up sitting with her for like 3 hours because she would make me tea and like the chai and all sorts of things. So I was around people who had nothing, but nothing from a worldly perspective, but had everything from a any other perspective, love and faith and other things. And so that's one of the things that I'm always kind of thinking about, is this relationship between life and materialism, I guess. And so I think, consciously, that's really what I'm thinking about, and kind of the my themes kind of surround humanity in that way. But at the same time, I'm sure there are a lot of things that I don't think so much about. I was heavily involved in sports when I grew up. Like, maybe sports has some kind of reason that I do what I do. My grandpa drove buses for a living, and he had a woodworking shop, and he used to fix bicycles for people. And I was with him every Sunday. And so, making things in the wood shop, and the feel of what that place was and the smell of the wood. I mean, these are just things I'm pulling out that, I don't think about too often, but it must have some kind of impact, which is why I'm so fascinated, by your story and kind of hearing about the things you think about.
I'm so happy that we got to talk, because I didn't know about this, and hearing about it makes total sense. Like, it makes total sense that you lived abroad, that your father was involved in non-profit, that he got you to it was quite impressive of him to like bring you to work and to, because were you young when you were going to like hospitals? And
yeah, I mean, my dad had a lot of people in our city that would call him if something was wrong.
mm-hmm.
So domestic abuse from somebody, they would call him to come and try to help the situation. If someone's son was, we had to pick somebody up from the police station because he was, found on the street, like high on drugs, or, so people called my dad to, come into these situations and be a light, I guess. And so, sometimes he would wake me up at midnight and would take me on those trips with him. And so it really was intentional. And he never was forcing me to do the work that he did. But I think he just wanted me to realize that, this is how the world is. And not in a pessimistic way at all, because it was often a really beautiful experience. And so I saw these parts of life that were difficult, but often when you're given the chance to be a light to somebody, even if there's nothing you can offer them, it's one of the more fulfilling experiences you can have.
Yeah.
Just showing up for somebody in a really difficult moment. I think in our world now, it's easy to have, lots of friends and acquaintances, but as soon as something hard, as soon as somebody's canceled, or as soon as something gets hard for people, we can, in general, can disappear.
Yeah.
And
yeah, for sure.
I think being there for people is really important. And so that's that's one of the more conscious things I'm always thinking about through, and I'm looking at it through an artistic lens. And that's usually where I'm, not that the themes I'm focusing on every season are directly related to that, but it's, I always think about the phrase memento mori, which means, death finds you. We're all mortal.
Yeah.
This life is short. And so, I try to not get too dark with it, but, but that is what I'm thinking about a lot of the time. What's your relationship with color, and how do you think of color in your collections? It's something that you focused on from even your MA show.
It's very intuitive as well. And I'm not sure I'll be able to explain it. It's just that it depends on the season, the collection, but I'm always drawn to, I think it's very difficult to work with colors. It wasn't always the case for me that I felt very comfortable with it, but it was really a big part of my research during my MA collection. And it's kind of has stayed part of the brand and kind of part of that language. But I guess, again, my upbringing has a lot to do with it. But in general, I just don't know how to explain it. Like, we spend a lot of time at the studio choosing colors and choosing what goes with what. And it is very intuitive to me. It's just that must go with that, or this specific, absent green. It just looks awful with that red. And I don't know how to explain it. I do spend a lot of time kind of working out the colors, and also because we work a lot with dead stock fabric, some of the colors we get are what they are. And it's that kind of game to try and balance it all out and make it work, because very often we just need to work with those fabrics because that's what's available. So yeah, I just don't know what the answer to that is. It's just that I try loads of things out and discard what doesn't work, and kind of keep moving. I mean, for sure. I mean, very often I look at paintings and I'm like, that is an incredible use of color, and that makes sense. We must incorporate that. That inspires me a lot, actually. Paintings, certain artists, I just think they're like color wizards, and I like looking at their work and the way they mix them.
Is there a reason that you decided to focus on, more colorful collections as opposed to more muted colors?
I think during my MA, it was, I think when I think about things that catch my eye, it always has to do with scale, color. And I was just doing a lot of research and looking at certain sculptures, and they just had incredible colors compared to others that were more muted. And I was like, it's just that I'm naturally drawn towards that. There must be a reason to that. And if it does that to me, it might do it to other people. So that's kind of how I intuitively got into it, I think.
I'd be really curious to know how the Diablo shoe came about. This is something you made for... Did you first make it for your MA collection, or was it your first show, your MA collection?
MA, yeah.
And you still carry it over to this day. But I would love to know the beginning of that and what that idea was.
So as I said, I got into the master's knowing that I was going to use that year and a half to really build the foundations of what my brand would be, not knowing what having a brand meant at all. But I've always loved shoes. I've always loved bags. And my mom, again, she's always had crazy collection of shoes. Like, we would go to like vintage markets, and we would she would just pin her shoes, put like laces and this and that. Like, we've always loved shoes. Like, really, she has really amazing shoes. And when I was doing my MA, I was like, I need shoes. Like, it can't just be any random shoe. It doesn't make sense. I always think, when I think about clothing, when I think about the collections, it just never is only about the clothes. It's really about the whole environment, the whole presentation, every single thing needs to be studied and needs to make sense. And when I was doing the fittings, just putting any random pair of shoes on just didn't make sense. And we started, my mom was over for like a weekend, and we started we took a last that I had, like a shoe mold, and we started with plasticine. We started making some experiments. And I've always been called Bambi because I always had very skinny legs. And my mom was like, well, what if we make hooves like Bambi, And I was like, that's so cool. And we started kind of trying things out, and we were like, this looks so good. And I started making collages, and it made sense. And that's when I showed it to the course director, and he was like, these are great. You need to make them. And I got introduced to an incredible designer and shoemaker, Alim, in London, and we made the first pair of Diablo together.
Was she also a student at CSM?
No, he was already, he was designing as a freelancer and making shoes for a bunch of people in London, and he just wanted to work with some students to kind of try out. But they are I don't have them here, but because I'm at home, not at the studio, but they are so long, the first ones. They were very difficult to walk in, but I was just so proud. And it was really amazing to work with him, go to the atelier. It's very technical to make shoes, which I love. And I've learned so much throughout the years. And it's something I love. I love making shoes.
I remember when you and I were in the LVMH Prize together and we were talking, and Bernard Arnault was walking around and talking to everybody. And I saw you and I was like, what did you talk about with Bernard? And you were like, you had said, he looked at the Diablo shoes and he was like, I bet you sell a lot of these, huh? I mean, he said something to that effect,
Yes.
right? And you were like, yeah. When did you know that you really had come up with a great idea that was also going to, commercially be successful?
I think a lot of, from the MA, we started getting a lot of people, stylists, to really want to use the shoes for photo shoots and all of that. But I think all of this makes sense to me. Any of these, if people can wear them. And I was like, I want to wear those shoes. So we need to make them into a product that is viable. So that's when we started going to factories in Southeast Spain. There is a big history of shoemaking very close to my hometown. Very lucky, by the way. And my mom and I were like, we need to make this happen. I was like, Mom, we don't know how to make shoes. You've never made shoes in your life. I haven't. This doesn't make sense. This is crazy. She was like, let's do it. So we just rocked in. We just ding dong at factories and we're like, hey, how are you? We want to make these shoes. And people were like, these women are just, they don't know what they're talking about. And we started kind of working with artisans, small, artisans that kind of knew their craft. And every first reaction was like, this is just so impossible. It's going to be so complicated to make. And that's when my mom and I started trying making it ourselves. So my mom bought a few tools and she was like, I'm sure we can make this happen. And when we make the first the styles, people wanted to buy them, and we made them so they were very comfortable and very light. And that's kind of how it's. I was thinking, if my mother wants to wear them and I want to wear them, then I'm sure a bunch of other people will want to. And
so you guys bought the tools to make the first mold of the shoe?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. We know how to make shoes. Drew, we learned by doing it.
I mean, footwear is generally, it seems like the reason a lot of new brands don't start footwear is because it's so difficult and so expensive.
Yeah.
But you kind of fell into it in a way. What did you learn really from making that first pair of shoes?
It's so technical. I think to be honest with you, the only reason why we make shoes is because the factory is 40 minutes from my mom's place and she gets to go every week. It's a very complex process. I think to make our shoes, there is between 7 and 8 artisans involved into making one pair of shoe. It is so technical, but it's just such an old craft and it's so beautiful. I've learned so much. I've struggled a lot. I've suffered a lot. Also because we have a very complex shoe to make and we want to make it comfortable. But it's been amazing. It's really these last 4 years have been a PhD on shoemaking, on the technical sides of even bags. So it takes. It's been very grounding because I think that's also often the case. There is a real disconnection between the consumer and what it takes to make the garments. A lot of people don't know what it takes to make their shoes. You just see shoes and I'm like, oh yeah, great. But actually when you dig into what the whole process and the hands that and the trials that take to make that pair, you're like, whoa, it's just
Was it the toe box that was the most difficult part of making that first mold?
It was that, and I'll be honest with you, it was also the fact that, and maybe you have the same issue. I think factories just can't be bothered to make things that are complicated to make. They want to make what they always make: the pointy shoe, the square shoe, the round. It's like, why not make what we've always done? And we're like, well, because the whole point of having my brand is the fact that we offer something that they can't find anywhere else. And that's the grind that we have to face with pretty much everything we make, is that opposition from the factories with the minimums and the technicalities of things. That is always, I think that's the most complicated.
After you made that first pair, and you were able to dial it in, has it been easier to make different versions of the shoe in that, you do a booted version, you do a heeled version? Or is it almost like starting from zero every time you need to do a new style?
Now it's much easier, because I think more than the style itself, it's been difficult to find the right people to make our things. In full honesty. And we have now found them, and they're amazing. But it's been such a, battle to find the right factories.
When using dead stock fabrics, can you use dead stock fabrics for the footwear?
No, that's more complicated, because I'd love to, and I need to find some time to really do more of that. But because it's more technical, and it's just, we work with fabrics that we know are gonna make to the workout. It's just not as easy as with clothes. But yeah, that's definitely something that we look to incorporate, because it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm curious if within your work using the dead stock fabrics, do you feel that those restraints help you with the creative process?
I am a maximalist, and I can go on and on and on. And it's just like, I'm a perfectionist as well. I can drag, and it's a way to frame the work. And because we don't only use dead stock fabric, but we really look for really nice, alpacas. We had some last autumn, winter, and some just really nice fabrics. That constraint really helps and frames the process, and it helps me.
Where are you going to find these fabrics?
We now have a big archive. We work with a variety of companies that focus on taking stock from like big houses that, for whatever reason, either it's, a few 100 meters that they can't use for the productions, or the rolls have a slight issue, but with our patterns we can go around. It's just a mix of sometimes going directly to mills, and some of the times is working with companies that focus on reselling those fabrics. But we've now created like a kind of archive, and we try to go at least once per season to do some research and kind of understand what the options are. And also it's great when it comes to production, because we kind of don't have to wait for the mills and the fabrics to be produced, and we can go straight on.
Which can be a huge problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do the same with the yarns? Do you use dead stock yarns when you're creating your knitwear?
Often we've started doing that. Like our latest autumn winter, we use some dead stock, but it kind of depends more on the factory. And because we don't have as many contacts with the knit kind of world, it makes it a little bit more complicated. So we kind of rely on whatever the factory has in stock.
Yeah. Are there, other than, the fabric constraints, are there other restraints that you put on yourself creatively to bring your vision to life?
It really depends. I mean, money is a constant constraint. That's a big constraint.
Which is a blessing and a curse, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
You have to put the best idea forward.
100%. And it's just like, I believe that, because you put more money into something, that it's not going to make it better. So I like that. I thrive in those sort of environments. Like, I like to be given, a situation and be like, that's what you have, and you need to make the most out of that. So I think that's our biggest constraint. But I think with the presentations, it's a lot of the time is that we create installations where the models or the performers have a lot of freedom, which means I don't really know what's going to happen, and I will have full kind of decision and power on it. And I kind of like that, because I think as designers, we can get very obsessed with how something should look and how something should be photographed. And we forget that actually we're making clothes that are going to be shipped to the other side of the world. Someone's going to wear them in a complete different way that you imagined. And I find that so fascinating. And that's why when we do presentations, I try to bring that element of just having absolute no take on that. Like, the garments, the collection is done, the garments are made, and now it's put out there, and it's not up to you. And there is a real beauty on that. And that's kind of also what I try to bring to the presentations.
Yeah, I recognize that, your pieces are very conceptual, or they can be, but you also are able to contrast it in a way that has a commerciality aspect to it. I mean, there are pieces that are very wearable, and there are pieces that are very conceptual.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you think about those two aspects of the collection? Is there a certain amount of commercial pieces that you're thinking about when building the collection? How do you go about that?
It's been a journey. I didn't used to think about that at all, but I am a consumer myself. And I was like, I wear this all the time, like whatever it is. It makes total sense. And now it really is, when we're at the studio, as I said, it really is a process of very personal kind of conversation of the four of us being like, would you wear that? Does that feel good? How is that? Can you see it? Are those pockets deep enough? It's just very practical things, but that makes sense. And I know it can seem quite conceptual, like because of the imagery that we put out there, but really, we spend so much time thinking about the finishings, the technicality of the bags, and it's so often the case that people come to me and they're like, oh my God, that pocket it's so rightly placed. You can fit your passport. And I'm like, thank you. Because we put so much effort into that, into the shoes being light, that is so important to me, because I have no interest in just making something that would stand in a museum and no one could wear. Like, what really fascinates me, and what I think you have to be very kind of bring a lot of creativity on, is to make something that looks very exciting, but that also feels very exciting to wear, and that allows you to move and allows you to do your thing. I cycle to work every single day. Like, obviously this doesn't have any, but I'm wearing my furry pants, and they're so
amazing,
easy to cycle on. Everything is cycling proof. Everything.
I did not know, with you wearing a hoodie right now, that you would be wearing the furry pants. That's amazing.
Of course.
I think my favorite things that you make personally is the knitwear. I think your knitwear is incredible. And I loved the recent collection you did with the, knit masks that you did. I would love to know how you think about knitwear and what you enjoy about the process of making the knitwear.
I think knitwear, it's got its own life, it's its own thing. And we work with an amazing factory, and we do a lot of research. It really depends on the season, but like, for example, when we did the hot mess jumper, it's like this, it kind of feels like a hairy chest. That's kind of really the reference were that. We were like, how can we recreate that into a knit? And there's just always so much back and forth. And what I find so beautiful about knitwear is, again, the technicality of it. And it's the same with shoes. It's just that it's not about making something that looks beautiful, but it's just so intricate, and there's so many elements that go into it. And it's literally with knitwear, it's programming, And I really like to push those boundaries. And I'm like, okay, what if, we do that, but it actually needs to be loose? And I don't know how to program a knit machine, but I think I know enough to know where I can like pull and push and kind of be like, I'm not sure we can do that, but what if we try? And it's I thank you so much. I really like that you mentioned that, because it's not what we are known for, knitwear, but it's something that we put a lot of time into, and yeah, I love knitwear.
In particular, I
love your knitwear as well.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I love knitwear, and it's the reason I asked is because I love the process of it so much, because it is so different than cut and sew. I mean, because with cut and sew, you can, as long as you have a fabric, you can make nearly whatever you want, but
instant.
But with knitwear, there's so many, just depending on the yarns you use, there's so many, it could be much more rigid in the process, and it can be, it just has its own difficulties, and it has its own problem solving. But yeah, I just love your knitwear so much. Do you also hand knits? Because you have these distressed sweaters that you make are just incredible. Are those hand done, or you also program those?
They're machine done, actually. Wow. They're machine done. I can hand knit very basic things. My great grandmother was doing incredible crochet things. And it's funny, I still live off some of those references. And I collect a lot of vintage as well. And I look a lot of, like the finishings. And I'm like, okay, what if we actually did that in, it's a mohair, but what if we did it in like a merino wool? And what if we changed the tension? And I have like, same as with our dead stock fabric, I have a big archive of garments and reference just for knitwear. Yeah, I like to play with those and work with the technicians too.
The masks that you made this last season, were those hand knit, or did you also program those?
So, no, these, so we were doing I actually didn't make those. We were doing the fittings for the show, and I was doing research, and I saw this person that was making these masks, and I was like, these are incredible, and I wanted to get them. It's a fetish person that's masks for like fetish, and I asked if we could work together, and he did those for us.
Yeah, it was incredible. What
models hated us?
Yeah. The models did, because it was itchy, or what?
Yes.
Because they had to be there for 4 hours.
They're like, this is awful. I was like, no.
It was interesting how it brought the collection together. And I'm curious why. What was the idea behind that? Because up until this point, you had never covered your models' faces really, but it was a strong focus on this last collection.
Yeah. To be honest with you, it just kind of made sense. We also, again, when we talk about constraints, casting in Paris is very complicated, as you might know. We just couldn't have certain models, and certain models wanted to do it, but sometimes the agencies put issues, and we said, well, the only way to do it is we actually cover their faces. And I was like, okay, well, I know this guy. I'm obsessed. I've wanted to work with him for a long time, and it just made sense. But it was a mix of the need to, with the fact that we wanted to do it for a long time. So yeah, that's again when constraints can actually help you think around,
yeah,
and make something exciting.
It seems that collaboration is not the focus of your work, but it is a large part of it. What makes a good collaborator?
I think there's not I wouldn't describe a good collaborator, but a good collaboration is really finding someone whose work you admire and you let them do their thing. Like literally when I work with someone, if we're like having that conversation, it's because I like what they do. And I'm like, yeah, just do it. I'm not too, like, I don't believe in adaptation and people adapting to, that's not what I'm interested in. If we reach out to someone or someone reaches out and we're like, this makes sense, I'm like, that's the whole point, is for that person to bring the work to different dimension. And I like to just give people the space to do that. So that's how we've kind of gone around it, I think, so far.
I think it's in our world, it's really important to find things you love and people that you love and allow them to make their own magic in a way.
Yeah, 100%.
Is that similar to the relationship that you have with your stylists? I'm curious how you work with your stylists for your shows.
So Aika Moshita, she's amazing. Normally the way it works is we do the collection, and because we now are selling during menswear but showing during women's, means that we are finished almost 3 months before the show. So she comes in and garments, everything is done. And we just like have a full day of like playing. And that's when it's not just about the clothes, but it's about putting the team together. And she'd be like, why don't we work with this other person for makeup? Like Christabel got introduced to us via and she's incredible. And we've worked with her for so many seasons, and she's just so good with makeup. So I would come, we would start doing that exercise, and she'll be like, what if we, I don't know, would do something in the head? And she'll kind of give us a little homework, and then I'll just be sending her hats, or we would be doing that look in different colors or bigger, some showpieces. And that's kind of how it comes together.
Yeah. Do you feel that, working with a stylist reveals something about the collection that you weren't necessarily looking at?
100%. I think it's just so refreshing when she comes, and I'm like, I would have never put those two pieces of clothing together, or I would have never thought about that blanket in that way. Or that's the whole point. Like that's why I admire her, and I like and look forward to her coming, because she really looks at something that you've had in front of you for 6 months with a complete fresh different set of eyes, and it helps, and it kind of like brings a new energy into the studio, and we're like, oh wow, okay, well, that makes total sense. We would have never, I don't know, how do you do it? Do you work with a stylist?
Yeah, I worked with Karen Binns the last 2 collections, but that was the first time I had ever worked with a stylist. I think at first, I was doing the styling myself for our lookbooks, because I think I had been thinking about these looks for a long time, and I was thinking about them in a certain way. But I think what's important about bringing in a fresh set of eyes is that they're kind of coming into a blank slate. I mean, they see the garments, but, they were not along on the process. I think in some ways the process can maybe taint how you. Yeah, it can trick you.
Yeah.
It can taint how you feel about some of the pieces. And so, because you're already thinking about a silhouette in a certain way, you're going to put things a certain way. Whereas working with, a stylist is going to help you. They have that fresh set of eyes. And I think, and shooting the collection is a really important part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, you've done most of the work up to the point, but I think a really good stylist can look at that and just give you that little something extra just to add something different. I think, one of the things that Karen said to me when we first started working together was, she said, Drew, your pieces are very masculine, and that's okay, but I want to add a little sexiness into what you're doing. So it's not really about changing the idea of it or changing the feeling, but it's just adding that little bit of something extra that you're not thinking about during the process, and giving it a little life in another area.
Yeah, and it kind of brings a different. It's the same thing as when you ship the production and someone buys it and wears it in a complete different way. It's a different point of view, and very often, in our case, it really elevates it and it helps push the story forward. And I really enjoy it.
I would love to ask you about the Vogue Fashion Fund. So this time last year, you won the Vogue Fashion Fund Spain. What was that process like? You and I were in the LVMH Prize together.
Drew, you've done your homework.
I'm prepared, Paula.
Wow. I'm
no, I remember because I texted you then because I was, I was, so excited for you. As you can tell, I love what you do and I want you to win. So, but I would love to know what that process was like. And then I would love to know if that's changed the trajectory of your brand at all.
It was very nerve-wracking because the other two finalists were my best friend and someone I studied with who is also a close friend. So it was bittersweet because we all knew that if we didn't win, someone we loved would win. But we also knew if we would win, that meant that two people we loved would not get that prize. So it was bittersweet, but it was great. I think very often when you talk about prices and you think about obviously the monetary implication, but I think it meant a lot, obviously, for us in terms of what it meant morally to have that support and to win. It just can be so difficult. And it was just a great feeling to be supported, to win in Spain and have family around. And Vogue Spain has been just very helpful. They also create content for you. And we did a photo shoot here in Paris that then got published in their January issue. So yeah, it's been a great experience. And I think it's just so important that these things exist because it's just so necessary and it can help tremendously. But even when you don't win, I think what was incredible about the LVMH as well was that we got to meet each other, and we wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for the LVMH prize. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, I think it can feel very, very lonely. And I very often have to face situations that I didn't study for, things that I never learned, that no one taught me. And I sometimes don't know who to go to ask for advice. And it's just really nice to talk to you, to talk to other peers about their experience. And it's just, we all go through the same struggles very often. It's got to do with production, it's got to do with cash flow, it's got to do with management, it's got to do with the pains of growing. And it's very reassuring. And it felt really good.
Yeah. The community aspect is so important. When I went into the LVMH prize, I was assuming that it was going to be very competitive. And I was surprised by how lovely everybody was. And I think, fashion, it's a microcosm, I think, of how fashion really is. Your brand and IRA can exist within the same world and both can do great. And I think, I learned that being with you at the LVMH Prize. You had the best young designers in the world all in one room and everybody was encouraging each other. And, after a long day interviews, we all went and had dinner. And it was, you can, if you wanted to, I guess, treat it like a competition. But in reality, art doesn't feel like a competition. We're all on our own journeys, and we're all discovering and rediscovering things about ourselves and about our process. And I think we can all exist in that moment and still root for each other.
Absolutely. And that's also something I've learned, that there's not such a thing as winning, losing. It's just, that was also something at St. Martin's. It was very competitive, and people that I thought would be doing incredibly and they aren't necessarily doing what they thought they would. And I just think life is always in constant flux, and you don't know what, that small seed that planted, that conversation, that friendship that you started through that, the LVMH Prize could take you in like 5 years' time. So yeah, I think if there is, I don't know about you, but one thing that this journey has really kind of taught me is patience. I'm not very patient. I am very hardworking, and I like to see results quickly. And I just really go for it. And it's a very long path that requires so many different components. It's such a complex puzzle that you really need to be resilient and patient.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I'm learning that as well right now too. I would love to know, last question. I feel that along my journey, there have been a few times where I've been discouraged, and there have been serendipitous moments, almost as if angels came down and were with you. I would love to know that if you've had one of those moments, and which one comes to your mind first.
I mean, so many. First was that call from Kanye. I wouldn't have the brand now if I hadn't gotten that job with him, because that funded the brand. I didn't know how I was going to do my next presentation. I didn't know how I was going to go into that production. And it was just that call that came out of nowhere that helped me, get things in motion. But very often is the case. And sometimes it's not, it doesn't take, like, of course, there are those very key moments that you remember and you're like, whoa, that's just, it's insane that happened. But very often it's just literally like a coffee with your grandparents and listening to them and their struggles. And you get to understand that it really is a journey, and things not being perfect right now and not being just, the way you expected them is natural, and that you need to be perseverant and consistent. And I think that pays off. I want to think that.
Absolutely. That was beautiful, Paula.
What was your moment? I want to know your moment.
Oh, I've had a few. One time I was in LA, and I was I used to live in the Silver Lake area, and I was at Intelligentsia, and it was 6 p.m., which I would never go to a coffee shop at 6 p.m. And I forget what it was, but I was feeling particularly discouraged at that moment. And this was before IRA. This is when I was working retail. I was probably like, maybe 25. I was working on clothing, but I had no brand. And I look over and I see Alessandro Michele sitting there. And he was at Gucci. I forget how long he was there at the time as the creative director. Maybe it was a year or two, but I think he was, at the time he was the most, important designer as far as everybody was concerned. And I was just in awe. And so, I went up to him and I got to have a conversation with him. And he was very sweet. He listened to me. He talked to me about making clothing. I can still remember what he was wearing, and, so that was just one moment. I think it's always seemed to happen when you need it the most. Another moment was when I think it was my second collection was in stores. I got a call that John Galliano had bought one of my pieces here in LA. And then, and I was, of course I was hearing that was on cloud nine. But then the next day he went into Dover Street Market, which were also stocked. And my friend was like, John is here. You should come down. So I got dressed as soon as I could. And I drove to the store, and I was able to walk around with John for probably an hour and a half, just walking around the store. I walked him through the collection, whatever was on the racks. And I got to talk to him about, being a young designer and pursuing a dream. And to this day, it makes me emotional thinking about it, because you have these moments that you're just in awe about, and there's no way to kind of describe what it means, when you have people that you view as your heroes that now are appreciative and loving of what you do. I feel like that's one of the best experiences as a designer that you can have.
Yeah, that's I agree. That's magic when you see that people you love wear your clothes, people you admire, artists. Yeah, that feels very special, for sure.
It really is. And Paula, I admire you, and I appreciate you doing this. So thank you so much.
Happy. I'm so happy, Drew, that we had this call and this catch up. And thank you so much for inviting me.